Another week and yet another game. This week, going to go into Starfinder, Paizo's other game. So last week was Pathfinder, and this is their sci-fi game Starfinder. So this is their rule book, and like of course, as you first do a flip open, you can see like the actual solar system that this is a set. So while Pathfinder is a fantasy set, and this is a sci-fi setting. So pretty much it's going to be the same kind of setup and everything, just like pretty much every other core rulebook. So you start off with the overview, the character creation, then it gets into the races, and the different classes, the skills, feats, equipment, and then pretty much gets into like the combat, and then like here it actually gets into like since it's a sci-fi one, it gets into starships. And of course, like you also have like a magic and pretty much like the game mastering, just like you would in like any pretty much any other core rulebook. Just like in the D&D Player's Handbook, you have a chapter on for the dungeon master. So, like you said, game masters, dungeon masters, the terms kind of can be interchangeable. So, like if I say dungeon master, and it pretty much the same thing as game masters, because like I said, those are pretty much interchangeable. So like yeah, this is pretty much like I said, the core rule book, and pretty much the only thing you need to run like a campaign in this setting. So basically, like pretty much like the introduction chapter is like it goes over what's in this book, and then like it gives like an overview of play, and like it basically gets in the first one gets into typical like terminology, like the attack roll, armor class, level, monsters, NPCs, PCs. So it gives a brief overview in the first chapter of that's what is pretty much an overview. So it also gives an example of play, so that way you can kind of get a feel for like, okay, so this is how it's supposed to go, and like and you get an idea of how it goes. So character creation pretty much works the same. Like it's different because like especially in this you get different races, and like you're going to have like different classes geared more towards like being a sci-fi type of role-playing game. The concepts are pretty much still the same. Like with my character creation video that I did for D&D, the concepts are still kind of the same. So like well, like you're kind of had to change some things because okay, this is a sci-fi one, game versus D&D, which is a fantasy. So you might have to change like some of the ideas. Like okay, well I have to like switch this out for that type of deal. But you get the point. Whereas like character creation for one game is like the pretty much the same for another game. So just like Pathfinder, Starfinder is going to be using like the D20 system, and they still use the same 6 abilities that you would find in like Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons. So it makes it that much easier to be able to go from D&D or Pathfinder into Starfinder here. So you're using the same ability, so you have an idea of like, okay, well I know what the every ability is supposed to do, and plus like it has the same kind of modifiers and the same kind of scale for the abilities that the other two games do. So it makes it like easier once you play one of those games to get into like another one of these games. And so of course it gives also a description of the actual ability scores as like you're beginning to create a character. So and this whole character creation chapter is pretty much like a same kind of concept. Again, like you'll pretty much be finding the same concepts in this. They just change things up so that way it can fit into a actual sci-fi setting versus a fantasy setting. And so, like you can see here, that it still uses the same like alignments, which and it basically like gives you a good idea of what kind of character you're going to be playing. So it gives, in a sense, like your morals and values type of deals. So for instance, in D&D, a lawful good character might be your stereotypical paladin, so who stands for like law and order, and who's like a virtue is kind of like a virtue of good. And of course, on the other end of the spectrum, you got chaotic evil, someone who would be like your what's known as the BBEG, the big bad evil guy. So like he's pretty much like a selfish and only concerned with himself, and like one of the things that kind of pops to mind is like in the Dark Knight, the Heath Ledger's Joker character, kind of like the anarchist type of deal. So he would be a good example of someone who's chaotic evil. And so the alignments aren't necessarily begin all end all for characters, but they do give you like a basic idea of like what kind of character you get. So, and it also gives like a quick table on how to like advance, and like same kind of concept again that you would find in like Pathfinder, and it also gives a description on like a multi-class, and so it goes through pretty much like the same kind of like ideas on like how to run a game, even though like this is like a total different than fantasy being in sci-fi. So like you can see the different characters that you could play. So like they have kind of like the same kind of concept of like the character classes. Like each one has their own abilities, and each one has like a is geared towards something uh, different in there. Like with Pathfinder, barbarian would be different than like a cleric versus a wizard versus a druid type of deal. So you can see like the descriptions up here, like with the outlaw and the mercenary. Like again, like with the pictures, you can get a decent description of like what kind of like a character you would play. So like like with the mercenary here, you get an idea that you're going to be playing like the soldier types player. So like almost like a barbarian or a fighter in the D&D or Pathfinders. So outlaw, you could kind of in a sense get like a more geared towards like roguish type player, or like yeah, also like you could do like a bounty hunter, sort of like a Boba Fett from Star Wars, and like the priest would be in a sense like this game's version of a cleric. So that's why this has like spells and magic and stuff. So and each like in a sense like again each class is geared towards something else, and so then it also gets into like the different races, which is going to be completely different than like your like Pathfinder D&D, which tends to be like geared towards like one planet, even though like you can travel the different planes of existence. Like here you are traveling across like a solar system. Like in the first when you first open the book, you can see the picture of the solar system. So you have like the different races, like or like the different species that like aliens and stuff you'd come across, and so like each one, just like in Pathfinder or D&D, like each race is good at something else, and of course like you do find like the humans in here. So like the humans tend to be like the stereotypical like generic race that you find just about in any game, whether it be sci-fi or fantasy. They tend to be like the stereotypical class that kind of binds everything together. And of course then you get into the next chapter with the classes, and like and they're pretty much like different types, but like the same kind of concepts. Like a soldier, you could say, would be like a fighter type of deal. Like an envoy could be like a bard, and like a operative, it would be sort of like your roguish type, and mystic would be something like someone like maybe like a wizard or like a cleric. So each class, like again, has their own abilities, and like you can see like here for envoy has like their just like the D20 system is set up. They have their base attack, they have the 3 saves they have, and then class features, basically like abilities that class gets. So it pretty much works like on the same concept of Pathfinder. It's just different types of skills and feats that you gear towards more of like a sci-fi setting versus like a fantasy setting. So again, this each chapter is pretty much similar to the core rulebooks of Pathfinder and or D&D, even though the systems are like slightly different. Like I said, this is based on the D20 system, just like Pathfinder is, which was what third edition of D&D used, and like fifth edition of D&D uses a slightly different version that like you can see in my character creation video that I put out a while ago. That is the fifth edition character sheet that I used to create a character. So again, like you can pretty much see like once you play like one game, and after you've played it for a while, you can jump into like another game and have like at least a basic understanding of like, okay, well, the systems are pretty much going to be working about the same, even though like the classes and races will probably be slightly different, and so going from one to another isn't too much of a leap. But no, there are some other games that I'll be getting into that use different types of like systems. And one of them is Blue Rose, which I'll be getting into eventually, but that one's like for future reference. So this is pretty much like the same kind of like I'll reiterate the same yeah, setup as most core books. So like chapter 5 here is all about like the skills and everything. So like again, this one's geared more towards like a sci-fi. So like for instance, like a piloting skill right here, you wouldn't necessarily find in D&D or Pathfinder, because piloting is more geared towards piloting a starship. So you wouldn't find that in like a fantasy setting unless you were maybe running a Starjammer campaign. But like that's kind of a specific campaign that you'd be doing for something. So like the skills pretty much work on the same basis as like a Pathfinder. You'll have like your skill ranks plus your ability modifiers, and you have to roll against like a DC or difficulty challenge type of deal. So you have to be able to roll that or higher type of deals, and like the more like, you get better at ability, the more ranks you have in it. So it's easier to get this something accomplish something with that skill. So and I'll kind of keep reiterating that like pretty much each rule book is like set up the same. So like I'm going doing like the quick flip through like the chapter 5 was the skills, and then like chapter 6 is the feats, and they pretty much have the same kind of concept as like I don't know how many times I can say that they have the same kind of like concepts as like Pathfinder and D&D. So like here in chapter 6 you can see like they give like a whole list on like the feats that you can get, and like what you need before you can get them, and it gives like a brief description on like what it does, and then like as you go through it, it gives like even further details of the feats that you can pick up and everything. And of course then going into chapter 7, you're going to find like again like the same kind of like concept of the equipment is just going to be more game oriented for in a sci-fi game like than you would like a Pathfinder, which is like fantasy type. So the whole table on like basic weapons and like melee weapons you saw like and guns and stuff. You wouldn't necessarily find guns like this in like a fantasy setting. I mean, you could do like the arcanist. You could run like a specialized class or like an artillerist or whatever in like the uh, D&D fantasy or Pathfinder, and so of course like it does give pictures of the weapons and armor and stuff that you can get, and of course it does go through. It gives you like a lot of different tables on like all the different types of weapons and ammo, so it does go into depth on like everything you can get, and so this chapter, like just anything, is like I'll say again, is like a kind of game specific. So that way, because you like a lot of this stuff you wouldn't necessarily find in like Pathfinder or whatever, but you could in a sense like run your own campaign and kind of introduce some of this stuff and everything. So like it does give like you can see pictures of like some of the melee weapons that are specific to this, which you could in a sense, like I said, kind of mix and match, and kind of if you played one game you can kind of like, oh hey, I like these weapons, maybe I'll like export them to this game type of deal. So and of course it also gets into like you can see special materials that you can find in like this type of setting. So this again, this a whole chapter on equipment, so it gives like you can see pictures on like the different types of armor, and like that this picture right here kind of like reminds me like the suit that the Marines in Starcraft would wear. So it kind of like gives like a decent artwork and pictures. So like I kind of picture something like this, something like one of the Marines in Warhammer would wear. So you can kind of like get ideas from other games that you've played type to do with the equipment. So and kind of like help flesh out your character even more. So, and this next chapter after equipments, chapter 8, is pretty much, they say, tactical roles, which is basically like your chapter on like how to run combat and everything. So it's going to be slightly different in the play, in the sense that like it's again game specific, and while the same kind of, like you can see, like the same kind of concepts will go from one game to another relatively easy. So, like for instance, if you've been playing Pathfinder for a while, or even D&D for a while, and you come in here into the Starfinder, it's not going to be too hard to pick up on the rules and like how to do things in this, because like it's relatively like easy, like with the same kind of setup, the same kind of concepts, to be able to like to go through this and be like, oh yes, I remember doing this in like in this campaign that we did like 2 years ago in this game, and we haven't played it in a while, but like the concepts are still the same, and I can kind of like figure it out that much quicker. So, and like Chapter 9 is pretty much all about like starships. So like this one is kind of unique to this game, because like I said, in Pathfinder or D&D, you wouldn't necessarily have starships, so you wouldn't have to necessarily deal with all the concept of different types of starships. So like just think of things like other science fiction, like Star Wars, Star Trek. You got like your typical fighters, sort of like the X-wing TIE fighter from Star Wars. You got like light freighters, sort of like the Millennium Falcon. You got like freighters and cruisers, sort of like your Star Destroyers, and your Mon Calamari cruisers from kind of use Star Wars a lot as like a reference, because like that's one of the most popular sci-fi themed games, movies, just about everything you can find out there. You got like everything for Star Wars, so I kind of use that as reference for this, to kind of like give an idea of like, oh hey, yes, I remember stuff like this. So, and it does get into actual like descriptions of like the different races, how they use different ships, and it gives like pictures and stuff. So like you can kind of get an idea of how like the ships look, and like it's like again, it seems like that like the artwork for these books are like pretty good at conveying a sense of like on what the ships and stuff look like. So, and it does give like an idea of how to like do like starfighter combat. So, since this starfighters and like starships are unique to this game, and of course like what fantasy world or science fiction game wouldn't be complete without like your special abilities, like spells and everything. So I think of like more like with a game like this, to be more geared to like psionics or like psychic abilities. Like think of like spells and stuff like that, and like something like that, and this like that. So instead of thinking well, spells is mainly fantasy, so think of it more as like psychic abilities, where they can use their mind type of deal. So then like it pretty much then, yeah, like I said, gets into this next chapter with like what's they call it in this game mastering, of course. Like again, you can call it dungeon mastering. So like gives like the DM like a good basis to be able to run the game without getting any more core rule books. So like for instance, like in the player's handbook for the D&D campaign, it gives like or books, it gives like a good chapter on like the basics for being a dungeon master. Even though like if you're a dungeon master, you may want to get like the DM guide and like monster manual, like I've mentioned before. So then like chapter 12 gets all into the setting of the solar system that you're in, and it gives background information on the whole setting of like the, not just the one world, but the whole solar system that you're going to be in. So like for instance, this is like the hub of the game, so it's the Absalon station. So like some things like that what come to mind is like, I don't know if people remember or have played the Mass Effect games, but like Absalon station kind of like it gives me the Mass Effect type of vibe. So Of course, it also goes into like different descriptions of the different plants in the system that you're in. So that kind of sets the stage for what kind of what kind of campaign you can do, like whether you're more geared towards one of the planets or like the Absalon station, or just you go across the solar system type deal. So, like I said, this is pretty much set up the same way as like your other rule books. So, and then you got the final chapter, which is like you can see it says Pathfinder Legacy. So, and it gets into like a conversion, so like different skills that you'd have, like for instance the different types of skills, how you can kind of convert stuff from like the fantasy to sci-fi. So this gets into like the conversion. So with this be both this and Pathfinder being uh, controlled by Paizo and be published by them, they do this so that way like you can easily go from one to another. And of course it has like a whole description and everything, and of course like and table of context and everything where you can find what concept and everything. So you can pretty much see like you got like a starship, in a sense, character sheet for your starship type of deal. So, and then of course it also has like the different types of books that you can get and like a adventure source. So this is pretty much like the core rule book of Starfinder, which is like Paizo's version of a science fiction role playing game, which like instead of doing fantasy like Pathfinder or D&D. So, and having not gone over dice before in any one of my videos, I'll go over those quickly just to end this. So like there's a difference, just so like people can finally get an idea of like the different types of dice that there actually are in this game. So for instance, like right here you got what's known as the four-sided, like instead of saying 4, 6, 8, 12 sided, we always see like a D4. And of course everyone's familiar with the six-sided dice, the D6. You got like the D8, which is kind of like almost like a pyramid type of dice. You got your D10s, and of course you got like ones like usually come in pairs. You can see like how they have like 50s, 30s, so that you can use that for percentage, or you can roll like a 2D10 and just read that as like a 5 instead. And of course you got like your typical 12-sided dice, and of course a one D20 to roll them all. So this is pretty much like the D20, and this is like the go-to dice for like rolling skills, rolling for combat and everything. So finally getting around to like going over the dice real quick at the end of this video after several months of going through books and everything, so that way people have an idea of like what the dice are after going through this core rulebook for the Starfinder. So next week I'll probably be getting into yet another game that isn't D&D or even Pathfinder as well. So there's still a lot more books and stuff that I'll be getting through over the next several months. So until next week.